I was looking at some travel vlogs of Tokyo this morning, just prepping for this, and honestly, it's intimidating.
Intimidating. How
It's
so?
just the
Yeah.
the sheer perfection of it all. You see these neon lights that go on forever, streets so clean you could literally eat your dinner off them, trains running to the exact second.
Hmm.
It feels like you're looking at the absolute peak of human civilization. It looks like the future.
That is the cool Japan brand. In a nutshell, it's an aesthetic masterpiece.
Exactly. But then you start to, peel back that glossy wallpaper, digging into the actual economic data we have for this deep dive. And it is, well, the source material calls it a financial horror show.
It creates such a vivid contrast, doesn't it? On the surface, you have this functional utopia, but underneath, you've got debt numbers that would land any other country in bankruptcy court.
Not to mention a population that is literally vanishing, and an economy that's, what, been in a coma for 30 years.
Right. It's like walking into a pristine mansion and realizing the foundation is just made of sand.
And that's our mission today. We're looking at a transcript of a conversation analyzing Japan's economy, its history, and its future. And the central question is just, how is this place still standing?
The material calls Japan a ticking time bomb that just politely refuses to explode. And that really is the mystery. How does a country with a debt to GDP ratio of 260%, which is just staggering, by the way,
Staggering.
and what they call zombie companies, still function as a top-tier global power?
260% debt. I want to put a pin in that because, if I had 260% debt relative to my income, I'd be in a cell.
We all would.
But before we get to the math, we have to look at the history, because you can't understand the Japanese economy today without understanding how they built it.
Absolutely. And to do that, we have to go back way further than the stock market crash of the 90s. We have to go back to the guys with the swords,
The samurai.
specifically the Meiji Restoration in the late 1800s. The source material highlights this as the moment the pattern starts. You have to remember, for centuries, Japan was a locked box.
Right? Feudal society, no foreigners allowed, totally isolated.
Completely isolated from the Industrial Revolution happening in the West. So while England is building steam engines...
Japan is still effectively in the Middle Ages, socially.
Exactly. And then the Americans show up. Commodore Perry and his black ships.
And it wasn't a friendly visit, as I recall.
No, it was a gunboat diplomacy. They basically said, open up or we'll open you up.
And that must have been a terrifying wake-up call.
It was an existential crisis. The Japanese leadership realized in a split second, we are behind, and if we stay behind, we will be conquered like the rest of Asia.
So they hit the panic button.
But it wasn't a chaotic panic. It was calculated. It was arguably the fastest upgrade in human history.
Really?
In about 30 years, Japan went from a feudal agrarian state to a modern industrial power that could build its own battleships and, defeat Russia in a war.
30 years.
Mm-hmm.
To jump forward 3 centuries? That feels impossible. How do you even do that?
This brings us to a concept in the material that I think explains everything about Japan, even today. The concept of Xeroxing.
Xeroxing. Like the copy machine.
Yes, but it's not just blind copying. The source emphasizes that they Xeroxed and improved. They didn't have time to invent their own industrial revolution, so they shopped for one.
So they sent people out.
They sent scholars to America, to Britain, to Germany. They looked at the British Navy, the American factories, the German legal system, and said, okay, we'll take that, and that.
It's like assembling a civilization from a catalog.
It is, but, and this is the key, they applied this intense, uniquely Japanese discipline to it. They optimized it. They took the Western model and made it more efficient. And this mindset, it sets the stage for the next major shift the source talks about, World War II.
Right. And usually when we talk about World War II, we talk about Pearl Harbor, Midway. But the notes here, they focus on the economy during the war. They use a term I hadn't heard before. Command capitalism.
It's a crucial distinction. In the U.S., we have free market capitalism. Companies do what they want, for the most part. But in wartime Japan, the government and the zaibatsu...
These were the massive family-owned conglomerates, right? Like Mitsubishi?
Exactly. They basically merged.
So it wasn't the government asking nicely for planes?
No, it was the government saying, Mitsubishi, you are now a wing of the military. Build Zeros. The entire country became a single, unified factory. Everyone moving in the same direction.
And here's where it gets really interesting for me. We know how the war ends. Japan is flattened. Cities are ash. The military is disbanded. But the source makes this point that the system, that command capitalism structure, it didn't actually go away.
That's the aha moment. They didn't stop the machine.
They just pivoted.
They just pivoted. They took that same military-grade discipline, that same structure of the government guiding the corporations, and they simply switched the output.
So the factory never closed. They just changed the product line.
Precisely. Instead of tanks, they made Toyotas. Instead of Zero fighters, they made Walkmans. And because they kept that Xerox and improve mentality, they looked at American cars in the 60s and 70s.
Which were getting a little lazy and inefficient, let's be honest.
They were, and the Japanese said, we can make this better.
And they did. I mean, my first car was a Corolla that I'm pretty sure is still running somewhere today.
That reliability created the Japanese miracle. They exported their way to wealth, and that wealth it exploded into the 1980s.
Oh, the 80s bubble. I remember reading stories about this. The source mentions that people genuinely thought Japan was going to buy America.
They bought Rockefeller Center.
That's right. There was real fear in the U.S. Japan seemed unstoppable.
The value of the real estate in Tokyo was so inflated that there was a saying, the land under the Imperial Palace is worth more than the entire state of California.
That is just insane. That's math that doesn't work.
It was a massive, beautiful bubble, and like all bubbles, it had to burst. In the early 90s, the stock market crashed and real estate values went to zero.
Okay, so here's where the story usually goes. Bubble bursts, companies go bankrupt, people get fired, misery ensues, and then you rebuild, creative destruction.
Right, that's the Western model.
But the source claims Japan didn't do that. They claim Japan didn't fire anyone. How is that even possible? If a company is broke, you can't pay the staff.
This is where culture completely overrides economics. You have to understand, in Japan, the corporation is like a family. Employment was often for life.
So firing people, mass layoffs.
It wasn't just a business decision. It was seen as a profound moral failure. It was shameful.
So they just refused to do it.
The government and the banks decided they simply wouldn't let these companies die, so they kept lending them money.
And this gives birth to the zombie companies.
It sounds like a horror movie, but it's an economic reality. A zombie company is a firm that isn't making a profit. It's effectively dead on the books, but it's being kept on life support by cheap loans from the banks just to pay the staff.
So you have these walking dead companies just cluttering up the economy, not innovating, just existing to keep unemployment low.
Precisely. It created a fake economy. It preserved social stability. You didn't have mass homelessness or riots, but it froze the economy in time. It's why Japan has felt stagnant for 30 years.
But wait, to keep a zombie alive, you need cheap money. You can't pay 10% interest on a loan if you're not making any profit.
And that requirement, the absolute need for ultra-low interest rates to save the zombies, that brings us to what the source calls the biggest scam of all time.
The yen carry trade. Okay. I'll be honest, when I see carry trade in the news, my eyes glaze over.
It's jargon. It's meant to be confusing.
Totally. But the analogy the source used, the grandma analogy, actually made it click for me. So let's break this down.
It's a brilliant simplification.
Yeah.
Imagine you have a grandmother who loves you very much, and she's willing to lend you money for free. 0% interest.
I need to find this grandmother.
She's great. So you borrow $1 million from grandma. Costs you nothing to hold that money. Now, you take that $1 million, walk across the street to a U.S. bank, and you deposit it in a savings account that pays 5% interest.
Okay, so I'm earning 5% on $1 million. That's, what, $50,000 a year?
Pure profit. And you didn't do any work. You didn't build a factory. You didn't invent an app. You just moved money from a low-interest zone to a high-interest zone.
And in this scenario, the grandma is the Bank of Japan.
Exactly. Because Japan kept interest rates at zero to save the zombies, Wall Street realized they could borrow yen for basically nothing. Then they convert that yen into dollars and invest it in U.S. treasuries or the U.S. stock market.
Wait a second. So this implies that a huge chunk of the money fueling the U.S. stock market, the money pumping up our 401ks right now, is actually borrowed Japanese money.
That is the argument. The source describes it as Wall Street pumping up the global markets with free yen. It's artificial liquidity.
That sounds great for us until it isn't.
Right. Because what happens if grandma gets mad? What happens if the Bank of Japan decides they need to raise interest rates?
Then the free money isn't free anymore.
And you have to pay it back. You have to sell your U.S. assets, your stocks, your bonds, to buy back the yen to pay off the loan. If that happens all at once, trillions of dollars could be pulled out of global markets overnight.
So Japan is effectively holding the trigger for a global financial crisis just by trying to manage their own internal mess.
It connects their stagnant, weird little island economy directly to your retirement account. It's a global liquidity bomb.
That is terrifying. But speaking of terrifying numbers, let's circle back to that debt. 260% debt to GDP.
It is the highest in the developed world, by far.
The source says if you or I ran our finances like that, we'd be under the jail. How does a country sustain that for decades without just collapsing?
Well, they've tried to fix it. You might remember Abenomics, named after the former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe.
The three arrows, right?
Right. Print money, spend money, and essentially pray that inflation fixes the debt. It didn't really work. But the reason Japan hasn't turned into Greece or Venezuela comes down to one specific detail: a family affair.
The source made a big point of this. It matters who you owe the money to.
Exactly. Look at the U.S. We owe a lot of our debt to foreigners, to China, Saudi Arabia, Japan. If they decide to dump our debt, we have a geopolitical crisis.
But Japan owes the money to Japan.
Specifically to its own citizens. Japanese people are historically huge savers. They are very risk-averse. They put their trillions of yen into the post office bank, which is a massive institution in Japan.
And the government then borrows from the post office.
The government borrows that money from the post office to fund its deficit.
So it's a closed loop. The government is broke, but the citizens are rich, and the citizens lend the money to the government.
As long as the Japanese grandmother trusts the Japanese government, the wheel keeps turning. It creates this weird stability. But the source points out the tragedy of it. Japanese people work incredibly hard, they build great cars, they have a massive trade surplus, but their standard of living has been stagnant.
Why?
Because the government is sucking up all that capital just to pay interest on the debt.
It's a polite, orderly stagnation. But while the economy is frozen, the world around them isn't. And this brings us to the geopolitical shift the source covers.
The unsinkable aircraft carrier.
That phrase gave me chills. For 70 years, Japan's identity has been pacifist. No war. It's literally in their constitution.
It was forced on them by the U.S. after the war, but they embraced it. But now, the neighborhood has changed. China is rising and aggressive. North Korea is launching missiles over Hokkaido.
So Japan is waking up. The source mentions they are doubling defense spending, buying Tomahawk missiles.
It is a massive pivot, and it puts them right in the crosshairs. Geographically, I mean, just look at a map. Japan is a chain of islands that completely blocks China's navy from easily accessing the open Pacific Ocean.
It's a shield.
It's a shield for the United States, for California. If you are the U.S., you need Japan to hold that line. That's why the term unsinkable aircraft carrier is used. But if you are living on the aircraft carrier, that's a scary proposition.
Especially when the aircraft carrier sits on top of 4 tectonic plates.
The ring of fire. This is the risk that no economic model can account for. The concentration of everything in Tokyo: government, business, media, 30 million people.
The source says if a major quake hits Tokyo directly, the economy doesn't just dip. It vanishes.
It's an existential risk.
Right.
And internally, the country is torn about this new militarization. You have the older generation who remembers the war screaming no more, and the right wing saying we need nukes, we need to be samurais again because America might not be here forever.
That's a heavy conflict.
Yeah.
But frankly, the source suggests that neither the earthquakes nor the Chinese Navy is the biggest threat to Japan. The biggest threat is silence.
The demographic cliff.
There was a statistic in here that I had to read 3 times to believe. Japan now sells more adult diapers than baby diapers.
It's the definition of a dying society. Not metaphorically, literally. The population is shrinking by the size of a small city every single year.
And it's not just that people are getting old. It's that young people have checked out. The source talks about hikikomori.
It's a tragic phenomenon. These are mostly young men who lock themselves in their bedrooms and just refuse to come out. Sometimes for years, they withdraw from society completely.
And then there are the herbivore men.
Right. Men who have no interest in careers, no interest in dating, no interest in sex. They've just opted out of the rat race.
Wow.
Think about the pressure cooker of Japanese society. The perfectionism we talked about at the start. The trains running to the second. The intense corporate loyalty. If you feel you can't meet that standard, the shame is overwhelming.
So they retreat. They stop participating.
And normally, a country with a shrinking workforce would solve this with immigration. That's what the U.S. does. That's what Europe does. You bring in new blood.
But Japan is choosing purity over growth. The source is very blunt about this. They want to keep Japanese. They're terrified of losing their cultural cohesion, that sense of safety and orderliness.
The source calls it economic suicide. You cannot have one young worker paying taxes to support 4 elderly people. The math simply breaks.
So they're left with a choice. The source outlines the extremes. The right wing wants a fortress Japan, kick out the foreigners, build nukes, go it alone. The left wing wants to open the borders and accept that Japan as a distinct cultural entity will change.
But the source says they aren't doing either of those. They're choosing option C.
Robots.
Robots.
I know it sounds like sci-fi, but the source was dead serious about this.
They are betting the house on AI and robotics. If you won't import people to care for your elderly, you have to build machines to do it.
The image the source canes is, well, it's wild. A nursing home in 2035 filled with grandmas and Terminators.
It sounds dystopian to us, but think back to the start of our conversation. Xerox and improve. Japan has always believed that technology can solve spiritual or societal problems.
If the problem is no humans, the solution is make artificial humans.
Exactly.
It brings us to the final thought in the notes, which I found surprisingly moving. They called it a beautiful tragedy.
That stuck with me too. The idea is that Japan won't explode in a civil war. It won't collapse in a chaotic revolution. It will just fade.
Polite, clean, safe, rich, just slowly turning off the lights in the empty rooms one by one.
It challenges our definition of success, doesn't it? We look at GDP, we look at stock markets, but if a society fails to reproduce itself, if there's no one left to enjoy the clean streets, did it succeed?
That's the haunting part. So let's recap the board here. We've got a technological giant that runs on a fake economy of internal debt. It's an unsinkable aircraft carrier for the U.S. military, sitting on a geological time bomb. And it's trying to solve a population collapse by building robot nurses instead of opening its borders.
It is a unique experiment in human history, a country living in the future and the past at the same time.
And for you listening, here's the big question I want to leave you with. We always look at Japan as this weird outlier. We say, oh, that's just Japan being Japan. They're different.
But are they? I mean, look at the demographics in Italy. Look at the declining birth rates in the U.S. Look at our own spiraling national debt level.
Are we really that different, or is Japan just the canary in the coal mine?
It is very possible that the Terminator nurse isn't just a quirky Japanese solution. It might be a preview of your own retirement plan 20 years from now.
On that cheery note, we're going to wrap it up. Thanks for diving in with us. Keep an eye on those interest rates, and maybe be nice to your toaster. It might be the only one taking care of you one day.
Indeed.
See you on the next deep dive.